Welcome back. Hope everybody had a nice, brief lunch. Once again, we'd like to thank all of our valued sponsors of the NextGen Supply Chain Conference, especially our diamond level sponsor, Honeywell Intelligrated, our platinum sponsor, the Association for Supply Chain Management, and our gold sponsor, Lemica. Bob.
Thank you, Brian. We're heading into the last block of the day, where we're going to look at big data, artificial intelligence, and machine learning. To kick us off, I want to welcome Maria Jesus Sainz. I got to know Maria, who writes often for Supply Chain Management Review, when she was directing MIT's graduate program in Zaragoza, Spain, and doing research into collaboration. Today, she's the director of MIT's Digital Supply Chain Transformation Program from the Cambridge, Massachusetts campus. She's going to give us an overview on where to start to create your digital center of excellence. Now, this is a pre-recorded presentation, so there won't be a Q&A after. Let's bring Maria on now.
Thank you very much, especially to the NextGen team. Really appreciated your invitation. I am really glad to be here just to share our research with all of you. Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Elena. Yes, for all your, nice piece of work, and especially putting all this together. So today we are going to talk about how to create a digital center of excellence, right? So then I'm going to share today with you the lessons that we have learned through our research on this topic, on digital supply chain transformation. So we have been working with several companies from different industries, going through different levels of maturity in the digital supply chain transformation journey. And then we wanted to share with you what we have observed in terms of the, let's put it in the way, the best practices, right? So we are going to focus on three main topics. So in terms of digital supply chain transformation, so it's really difficult to put a definition. So this was also a research question itself, how we can better define digital supply chain transformation. So after several discussions with our executives, so we decided to define as this application of digital technology and data, right, to transition, and transition is also important. It's a kind of attitude to move to this excellence in their supply chain, right, towards a value-driven supply chain. And we wanted to put value here because it means that you want to measure which kind of value you want to bring in order to make a more competitive supply chain, right? So that means that, whatever kind of new dimension, right, behind of the value creation that you have here, right? So then we wanted to put value in order to give the freedom to explore new opportunities, new parameters, new dimensions that could appear thanks to gather all this piece of information, of this piece of data through the technology. This is why we defined digital supply chain transformation in that way, right? So what we have learned is that, of course, digital technology is accelerating the pace of business and transforming, but especially supply chains, right? Supply chains have a very prominent role because actually supply chains are very good translators, moving upstream, downstream in the supply chain, but also with different stakeholders and logistic service providers, finance stakeholders, right? Startups. Supply chain is also very well performance oriented. So then, supply chain could be a core element in the digital transformation of the company. As a second opportunity, then of course, we can find some opportunities for reducing the cost in processes and also increase revenue in our final results. Of course, putting figures sometimes is a little bit tricky, but this is what we have found in our research. This 50% reduction in process cost and 20% in increase in revenue, right? Not all the companies can go through all these results, but some of them they can, right? And also the opportunity of inter-organizational collaboration. And this is one part of our research, right? And I wanted to share with you today. So then if the company has an open mind in order to collaborate with different kind of stakeholders from many different dimensions, not only the traditional way of collaborating, So vertically, upstream or downstream, buyer, supplier kind of mode. But also there are other ways of collaborating, what we call here multidimensional collaboration, playing vertically with horizontal collaboration, but playing with the startups at the same time that play with even with competitors. So then you have some glue that is the data, right? So then you can use for promoting all these collaboration, right? This is the idea. So our piece of research, we focus on these three areas. As I mentioned, multidimensional collaboration. I have put here what is our, main projects that we have been working in. Digital supply chain capabilities, how to deploy the strategy, right, together with the strategy of the company. And also artificial intelligence in supply chain management. So we will gonna focus on these topics around this presentation. So actually, I'm going to focus on these three, main lessons learned from our case studies. So first, let's expand the boundaries. Let's find new ways of collaboration, but this requires additional, features in your center of excellence, right? Different elements in order to be open to explore and exploit together with your partners. I will explain in a minute. The second point is, let's embrace the opportunities of teaming up together between human and machine. So then human is a very dynamic and smart entity, but also machines can be very dynamic and a smart entity. So then can we bring the main features of the two entities together in order to make our supply chain more value-driven, as we have defined at the beginning? This is our second point. And the third, there are a lot of loops in digital transformation, but actually digital gap, right, reinforce digitalization. So then we have found that, especially in the front of the COVID situation, so we have found that a lot of companies that were very mature in terms of digital transformation, the supply chains, they have been, going through this, disruption with the COVID in an easier way if we compare with those companies that maybe they didn't start the journey yet, or they want to start because they really, feel the need of doing this transformation, right? And those companies that have not started yet, or they are a little bit, late, they really need to transform themselves, but they find, a lot of difficulties, right? A lot of challenges in order to promote the right pillars in the digital transformation journey. So I wanted to share with you these three main topics, right? So let's start with the first one. Let's talk about the boundaries. So, of course, we call it here multiple dimensions in the collaboration. We are more used to the vertical collaboration, buyer, supplier kind of mode. Again, with my suppliers upstream, with my customers downstream. But what about, collaborating with the competitors? Right? So maybe if we don't share very strategic core elements, then maybe we can, with our competitors, we can bring additional resources, additional synergies in order to be able to contribute in a more innovative way to find this value that we were mentioning in the definition of that at the beginning, right? We are talking about horizontal collaboration among shippers, right? Or among suppliers that are, delivering to the same customer, right, downstream. Or maybe suppliers that maybe they don't have the same customer, but they are located in a common region. So they can share resources, they can share maybe last mile delivery, right? Or maybe logistics service provider that they don't have good coverage in the certain geographic region, right? Or retailers. Or even backhauling, right, in order to take advantage of all these gaps in capacity. Additionally, then some of the features of this horizontal collaboration in digital transformation is that we need to be aware of what is the expected performance of all the stakeholders, right? So we need to recognize that in order to, get all these network effects in front of the digital transformation, we need to align the performance from different stakeholders. I mean, if there is a small company that is in my region, I am a big company, we want to collaborate in last mile delivery, right? Let's recognize that this small company cannot, perform at the same level that I am, because maybe the density they have is not the density that I have. But maybe recognizing the different levels of performance, right, and different reach in their performance, maybe we can combine our resources in order to have a synergetic, result, in order to reach all this scalability that all these digital platforms are mentioning. Third, align incentive, right? Align incentives in terms of, let me put it away. Here we go. Yeah, align incentive dynamically. Right? So we need to put the rules in the collaboration in the digital platforms, different rules and different expectations in performance from the different stakeholders, in which we can better, align the incentives, right? In order to make our collaboration, make it grow, right? Then the next is dynamic supply chain segmentation. We have tons of data, right, in order to make this collaboration to happen. So let's try to be flexible in order to deploy the best flows according to the different settings we have. So maybe we are playing a small player with a big player. The segmentation will be different than if we are, collaborating with two big players in terms of, for example, last mile delivery, right? And then finally, the beauty of, again, digital platforms. So because there are different opportunities in the digital platforms, but also the statistics, showed us that it's tricky, and only 70% of the platforms survive. Why? Because it's difficult to get this network effect and this scalability. But then if we are able to be flexible, dynamic, to align the incentives, we have better opportunities for succeed, right? This is the idea here. So digital platforms have a key role. Actually, the idea is just to recognize all the different key players. So here in this example, we built a digital platform for a particular retailer, and then the retailer wanted to collaborate with different small players in certain area for the last mile delivery for their e-commerce, right? So then, for example, the big retailer that could work together with restaurants, right? Or work together with dry cleaning. So different players that they belong to different supply chains, they can bring density. So let's recognize, for example, density as the parameter, right, that will drive the scalability of the digital platform, right? But let's recognize also what are the incentives and the performance for the restaurants. Maybe what is the performance for the dry cleaning? Maybe we cannot mix fish, right, with the dry cleaning, clothes, right? So then again, what are the, complementarities and even the conflicts of all this game, right? And then let's deploy this reinforcement loop here on your right, in which we have the what is the service level expectation and how we can improve this loop, right? So then this will require another kind of key performance indicators. So for example, if we are deploying here service levels in the last mile delivery, this will be quite kind of, key performance indicator, but maybe we will need some key KPI regarding the scalability of the network. So the higher the number of partners, the better we can reach this scalability. So let's try to put this incentive and try to measure this additional reinforcing loop, right? So I would like also to share the second lesson here, that is how to make better teams between human and machine, right? Actually, we just published an article in a Sloan Management Review. Let me put it here. Yeah, how to design AI systems in order to promote these human-machine teams. How we can recognize the beauty of all these, entities in order to try to take as much advantage as we can. And then we published, we developed a framework, right? This framework is based on different axes. So we develop a kind of matrix, very easy to understand and very easy to deploy, while every quadrant will be deployed with additional features, right? So the idea would be first to see what is the process. The process that is going to be supported by the AI system, right? In this case, let's try to recognize that there are closed processes, right? It means that we know very well what are the parameters that are going to guide these processes versus open processes in which we don't know exactly what are even the performance expectations, what are the key parameters that need to be involved. So we need to allow the AI system to learn. And this learning will require more human component here, right? The other axis is the risk in the decision making. Maybe there are some decisions in which we will have lower risk. So let's say wake risk, or we will have some other process in which we will have more severe risk, right? So this is the axis here. Yeah. So in this quadrant, we will have what we call machine-based AI, right? In which we have closed processes and then wake decisions. So in this case, the machine, the algorithm, the AI system, in this case, the AGVs can work by themselves. They will have some expected performance parameters, but it will work, alone, right? And then we will have the, in this quadrant, we will have, for example, the drones, in which we will need more supervision for the human side in order to see, okay, where is the region that is going to cover by the drone, if there is any risk, because maybe some kids are playing, right? And then we will have more severe decision making, so then we will need more supervision from the human point of view. In this quadrant will be open. So exactly, for example, new flavor for an ice cream, right? That we don't know exactly how it's going to behave in the market. So maybe we can put some mirrors in the AI system in order to replicate expected behavior of a past, a previous flavor, right? And then the human will train the AI system to tell, okay, put these anchor points with this, old flavor, because potentially the new flavor, the new product will behave in a similar way. Or let's go to here, right, in which, it will be open process, it will be severe decision-making, right? This is the example of human-based AI system in which then we will need more human intuition in order to decide what are going to be the trends, what are going to be the expectations. So this is the example of the supply chain processes with the COVID-19. We didn't know about this, what will be the behavior, because we don't have historical data that could feed up all these systems, right? So, and then we can build different, different features here. And just to finish, I wanted to go with the third lesson that, the third lesson is that, okay, for the Center of Excellence, don't focus too much on technology. What we have observed is that those companies that focus a lot on technology, they have a kind of Frankenstein. So each technology or case, use case, as it's called, right, will be a piece of the Frankenstein that they don't match very well together, right? But of course, if you are putting some strategy, some vision, okay, what are the intentions? Why do I want to change my supply chain? What are the value propositions behind? What are my expectations? And then the answer will be the technology, right? So then it's like we will put some sense on the different, shape of my Frankenstein. We can polish the sculpture, right? And then, of course, we will have a very handsome, Frankenstein that will make a lot of sense with some maybe mistakes, right? But then it would make sense for my expectations in my supply chain and my market, yeah. So some very final lessons, right? So what we have found is that, again, incompatibility with traditional economic, strategic, and operating models. Be careful, you want to continue with your traditional models. We have found also ambidextrous organizations in which again, all the time they are using the two hands, exploration or innovation and exploitation, right? And they are, working together. The business priorities, as I have mentioned with the Frankenstein, are really important. Supply chain partners need to be involved, because otherwise you will be alone, and then you will, push for certain speed without, reaction from your partners. Companies, they don't know what digital really means, right? They think that it's only technology, but it's definitely much more than that. And again, misunderstandings of the economies of scale, right? So then more value for the customer, sometimes for the firms, right? So then sometimes it's very, easy and freely to reproduce. And then the scale and network effects. And finally, so be careful with the power of cost, because sometimes you put a lot of effort, a lot of investment, and it's difficult to recover, right? So there's a lot of uncertainty behind. Okay, this is my presentation. So thank you very much again for listening to me. Happy to also to answer your questions, Bob, right?
Great. Thank you, Maria. That was a great presentation. One observation, you finished with the Frankenstein example and the watchword of don't focus on the technology. And interestingly enough, I just this past weekend was editing an article for Supply Chain Management Review from Morgan Swink from Texas Christian University, who's been doing some research with the Association for Supply Chain Management in digital technology. And the core theme of the article that he did, along with Nada from Northeastern, was don't focus on the technology, that people get hung up on the technology and forget the processes. And as soon as you put that slide up, it really resonated. I thought it was a valuable lesson. One of the questions I think when it comes to things like AI and machine learning and some of these new digital technologies, robots we understand, right? It's a mechanical thing. You know what it's going to do. You can kind of figure that out. AI, machine learning, to another degree, blockchain, they're a little bit harder to identify where they fit or where we start. So if you're thinking about, okay, I'm going to do a digital center of excellence, if I'm thinking about my supply chain, I know it's going to be a different answer for everyone, but how do I identify a starting point in my organization where I can, get that low-hanging fruit, get something going, get some results, and then use that for the next project? How do I start?
Yeah, this is a great question. And actually, we have found the same kind of situation again and again, case study after case study, right? Typically, the companies start with the technology. So let's put some, use cases. So let's apply here IoT, let's apply here RPI or a robot, cobot, whatever, right? But then, okay, so what? So then the pieces are not matching together. So my strongest recommendation, and we are going to publish a case study together with Dell, Digital Supply Chain Transformation Journey, right? In which we use in our courses in order to teach exactly this kind of, paradigm, right? My recommendation will be to start with the experiences you want to develop. Which kind of experience you want to develop? Mm-hmm. Do you want to make the right commitments with the customers, right? So then this will be that we need to evaluate all my supply chain planning processes, put technology in order to develop certain capabilities, but just as an answer of what I want, what experience I want to develop, not the opposite around. Not let's put some kind of blockchain because my competitors is putting blockchain. Absolutely not. Should be the other way around. And we have found this kind of journey, this kind of difficulties of being stopped with the technology in every single case study.
So, so it sounds like, one of the first things you said, one of the first slides you put up there was value-driven supply chain, right?
Yeah.
And if I understand correctly, what you mean by that is the value that you want to improve upon or the value you want to derive is going to be different for every company. And so, using an example you just did, like, say, customer service, that's the value I want to deliver. So now I'm going to look and see how I digitize that. For somebody else, it might be something else. It might be quality. It might be cost reduction, whatever the case. But that's what you mean by value. Am I correct?
you are totally correct. And maybe for some companies is density, how to build density, right? So because then density is what is giving me the opportunity to be more efficient, right? So the value will be density, not the efficiency. Efficiency will come later. I am putting this example because then it's easy to measure density. Or, I mean, measuring, for example, measuring complexity. This is another opportunity for value. Some companies, they embrace complexity because part of their competitive advantage is just to deploy complexity in order to, satisfy their very diverse, customers' portfolio, right? So then this is why value means completely different things for every single company. And this is why they should define first value. What do I expect to bring into the table, right? In order to be more competitive. But then we will get the answer, okay, what is the technology do I need? What are the capabilities do I need to develop? What are the supply chain processes I need to change? Some of the companies we have been working with, they decided to, start from scratch in terms of the supply chain planning processes, right? Because this value expectation will require different processes that will be supported by different technology and actually different actors, right? Yep. So then, okay, going to the business priority value propositions, going to supply chain capabilities, technology, supply chain processes, and actors. This is our framework.
Great. Thank you, Maria. That's all the time we're going to have for today. I want to thank Maria Jesus Sainz for a great presentation. Maria, I want to give you a shout out because I did publish that article that you put the title up. And to any attendee that would like to read it, it is available on scmr.com. Again, Maria, thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank
Bye.
You. Welcome back. I hope you enjoyed that presentation and that Maria gave you some thoughts about how to start your own digital journey and your own digital center of excellence. You know, we're still just coming out of the starting gate when it comes to putting big data, AI, and machine learning to work in our supply chains. As Maria pointed out, the challenge is identifying the areas in your organization where they can deliver value, or in Maria's words, create a value change. It's going to be different for everybody. Now, there are companies that are taking steps to move the technologies forward in their organizations, even if they are early steps. In our next presentation, David Villopando, Senior Analyst in Logistics Analytics at the Kraft Heinz Company, will share with us how his organization is utilizing big data to optimize inventory planning and management. They're not there yet, but David is next going to take this project and look at how they can apply AI and machine learning to inventory management. So without further ado, let's hear from David.
Thank you, Bob. Hello there. I'm David Villopando, and I'm here to talk to you about pushing an efficient inventory frontier at Kraft Heinz. So just a little bit about me. I'm currently the Senior Analyst of Logistics Capabilities with the Kraft Heinz Company. I've been with them for a little over 2.5 years, going on 3 years now. And a lot of what I do focuses specifically on inventory from a top-down as well as from a bottoms-up perspective. So today we're going to talk to you a little bit about, what is inventory optimization really, as well as what we did at Kraft Heinz to implement these kind of models of inventory optimization. We'll talk about what the results of those models has been so far, the progress that we've made, and we can also talk a little bit about what you can do at your company to implement some of these methodologies of inventory optimization. And finally, we'll just chat a little on how COVID-19 impacted us and what we did to really respond to this unprecedented dynamic. So a little bit on inventory optimization. I really like this descriptor. Inventory optimization is a strategy for balancing the amount of working capital that is tied up in inventory with service level goals across multiple stock keeping units, or SKUs specifically. So this really describes the relationship between service and inventory. And on screen, you can see that we have just a map of what one of our optimized models is across the United States. And this is pretty intricate, I would say. So when you kind of refer back to that older mindset of we need to carry more inventory if we want to increase our service levels, you have to keep in mind that sometimes the network isn't built to support that methodology. So what inventory optimization is doing is helping you to remove the complexities of a model this intricate so that you can really find that sweet spot in inventory to make sure you're not holding too much to bog down the network, or you're also not holding so little that you're not able to service properly. So just to expand a little bit upon that, this is kind of showing what the different phases are of inventory optimization. And it's also reinforcing that the relationship between inventory optimization, between service and inventory, shouldn't be a linear model. So regardless of where you are in your current process, or where your company is today, maybe you're at that green or that orange dot that says today right now, there are steps that you can take to really improve the inventory optimization and increase your service level, while also bringing down the amount of working capital you're tying up in inventory across the board. So there's always going to be that trade-off between, we need inventory in order to meet service, but it doesn't have to be that linear relationship where you always need to carry more inventory to hold service. It's also going to be talking about where we need to be holding inventory, exactly how much we need for demand variability and things of that nature. So it's about moving through these phases of inventory optimization that's going to allow you to hold less working capital while also improving your service, up to that 99.8% if possible. So just to expand on that a little bit more, we have a model that kind of shows the different stages, of inventory strategy. So if you were just at that green dot of maybe you haven't really implemented anything with inventory optimization yet, you might be using the rule of thumb. So that's like saying, okay, we need to hold at least 28 days of stock at this location, at least 14 days of stock at this location, and kind of building up from there. Moving on to the next stage, you can see it's single echelon inventory optimization. That's where you start looking at, a collection of warehouses in the network and saying, okay, how do we optimize the inventory model at this stage of our network? And that really is going to help you to identify areas where you might be holding too much or too little inventory. Moving into the internal multi-echelon inventory optimization, that's where you start looking at the WIP, the work in progress goods. You start looking at the raw materials. You start looking at the forward network, where your customers are pulling their orders from, to make sure that's also holding enough inventory. So it's a complete end-to-end look at all the different stages in your network to make sure that you're optimizing your inventory along each stage in that network. Finally, there's the extended MEI, or extended multi-echelon inventory. That's where you start looking at your suppliers' networks and starting to understand how they're doing their inventory optimization, so you can make recommendations based on what your projections are. You start looking specifically at what customers are cutting, and you start saying, okay, why aren't we holding enough inventory there? And you're making sure the customer has enough inventory in their warehouses to support any sort of transition that may need to happen. So there's definitely steps along each method here that you can take to bring your company closer to getting to that extended MEI stage, to really optimize every single node in your network to the fullest ability possible. So a little bit about what we did at Kraft Heinz. So back in 2016, Kraft and Heinz were two different companies. They were merged to make the Kraft Heinz company that you know today. And back then, Kraft had Logility, which is a software that allows us to do the bulk of the calculations for safety stock settings throughout the network, but Heinz did not. So what that meant was that we now had to almost double our SKU portfolio, while also making sure that all the inputs and outputs to this model were accurate, and that we were going in and validating relentlessly every single data point to make sure that the system was flowing the accurate data necessary for this software to make its calculations its recommendations as accurate as possible. So once we had all those inputs and outputs properly set up, and we could trust them to a certain degree, we started creating what we called the mins and the maxes for each SKU throughout the entire network. What that means is looking at all the safety stock settings at every single node throughout the network, calculating what that case requirement would be, and then transitioning that into 1 weeks of stock number for each SKU, and then looking at what the cycle time would be for that SKU. So, how often they're producing, or what their min quantity produced would be, or how long it takes for them in between runs to understand what that cycle time should be. layering that on top of the min weeks of stock number to get to that max target. So now for each SKU in our network, we have what the recommendation should be for safety time at each node in the network, but we also have that min and max target that a planner can go in to plan against to make sure they're not overproducing or they're not going to be cutting on orders in the future. So in order to really gain trust in these numbers is where you have to do a lot of change management. So what that meant was working with IT to make sure that we understood all the inputs and outputs as well, to make sure that we were able to communicate and validate this data, you know, on a daily basis if necessary, and being able to take that and show it to any relevant stakeholder, in this case, maybe a supply planner, supply manager, and really help them build the confidence in this data so that they can trust it at the end of the day. Because these are people that do work with it a lot more on a day-to-day basis. They're in the plant schedule, making sure that they're producing the product that they believe they need. And a lot of times that's based off of historical knowledge that they have with the business. So you have to trust what their judgment would be, but at the same time, you have to show them that this data is coming from a place that we can trust as well. And if historically the data supports that we can carry at a lower safety stock level than what the planner is proposing, then we're able to show them exactly why they should be trusting these numbers. So it's about those daily touch points, training with them, you know, on a weekly or monthly basis so they understand all the calculations. And then from there, once you have that solid foundation of confidence, you can start visualizing the outputs, showing where we are right now, where we're projected to be on inventory, and what that plan is against what the targets should be for the min and max, so that you can show what the variances to the plan are and give them opportunities to either increase or reduce their plan based on these targets. And I just want to reiterate that along every stage in this process, you need to be open to feedback from every key or stakeholder, because really it's their feedback that's going to allow you to improve this process. You know, there's so much that can really fluctuate in a network this vast with a SKU portfolio this diverse. So it's this kind of continuous improvement and searching for these pain points in your calculation process that's going to allow you to both improve the model and also build even more confidence with it. So an example of that, I would say, is that, you know, we had this item, it's a Cool Whip item. I think it's like the fat-free, sugar-free variant of Cool Whip. And this item couldn't be run in the summer because the plant was in Dover, Delaware. And what that meant was the extreme high heat in the summer wouldn't allow the product to emulsify. So in order to be able to service their demand through the summer, they had to build production on these SKUs so that they could hold more inventory before those high heats started, so that they were able to service until they were able to produce that product again. That's something that wouldn't really be naturally captured in a data set that mostly looked at demand variability and lead time variability and so forth. So those are the kind of things that you really have to allow for the feedback of and take into consideration in your targets to make sure that you're supporting the plans and the plants and the planners in the most optimal plan possible for that. So Mac and Cheese is a really great example of how we at Kraft Heinz have implemented inventory optimization. You know, it has a high demand across the entire network. It has a really long shelf life. It doesn't go bad very easily. It has stable demand across the entire year with very little seasonality, depending on whether, you know, it's fall or spring and so forth. And it also has decades of demand history, so that we're able to, you know, really accurately forecast what we believe the demand should be for the future. On top of that, it also has a very consistent production schedule. You know, we can run it almost weekly because there is such stable demand for it. And there isn't really any regional bias either. It's a pretty national demand profile. So there's very little regional influence around that. And with all these key characteristics, you would think that Mac and Cheese would be something easy to increase the service on while also decreasing the inventory on. But what we discovered was that even though we were holding so much inventory on Mac and Cheese, our service numbers were dropping. And that prompted us to do a lot more digging into why this was happening. So what we discovered was that when we carry too much inventory on mac and cheese, this additional inventory needs to be stored in an outside storage or a distribution unit is what we call it. And a lot of times this distribution unit isn't even that close to the proper buffer warehouse or mixing center that it needs to be sent from to the customer. So what ends up happening is they have to shuttle this inventory to the distribution unit for storage, then shuttle it back to the mixing center for shipment to the customer. But that additional lead time ended up causing cut orders and our service levels to drop. So sometimes, there just weren't enough transport units in order to get the inventory back and forth. Sometimes the transport units were late and the inventory was there and we just couldn't even ship it on time. So it's really important that you kind of find that sweet spot of inventory throughout the network so that these kind of issues don't happen. Even though you have a product as stable as mac and cheese, these are the kind of issues that you can encounter when you're trying to balance your network. So it really reinforces that inventory optimization shouldn't be this linear relationship between holding inventory and servicing, because there are so many intricacies and complexities in the network that can cause your service to drop, even though you're holding more inventory than you may have ever before. So holding that sweet spot of inventory is going to allow your network to flow smoothly and on time. So the results of this investigation and of this implementation of inventory optimization were that we were able to reduce our inventory by about $100 million. So that's working capital that we're now able to take and invest into other operations like lean foam manufacturing or just into the optimization of the network in general. On top of that, we saw a 1.1 increase in service. So that's 1.1 doesn't sound like a lot, but for a company of this size, 1.1% is about $240 million in incremental sales. So we're decreasing our working capital by 100 million, increasing our sales by 240 million. And then on top of that, just a little cherry on top is that we're able to reduce the amount of waste that we're producing. So product that we can no longer sell because it's exceeded its maximum ship life. So that's reducing year over year by about $20 million. So all of these key factors really show you that inventory optimization is just going to help your business improve its operations as well as improve the amount of finance capital that you need to be investing and also reduce the amount of losses that you throw away at the end of the day. So this first graph here, the reduction in overplanning supply, shows you kind of a story of how we were just producing at first. And then over time, we're able to bring down these production levels so that we're able to focus on just the SKUs that truly need to be produced instead of just holding inventory because we believe we need it to service. Over here on the right, we can see that the reduction in waste risk. So between January and February, we saw that there was a trend of going between the 37 down to 31.4. And then between June and July, we saw that it dropped dramatically. That drop, I just want to be frank, was due to COVID. So we can't take all the credit, but you can see that the trend does start in January, February, where we're trying to reduce the amount of waste risk that we're generating. So these are, true results that we saw using the inventory optimization models and holding true to the targets that we designed and those calculations and just over communicating, implementing that change management. So let's talk about what we can do with your company, regardless of what phase you're in right now. I would say that the first and probably maybe one of the most important things that you should be doing is really creating a culture or reinforcing a culture where you crave data-driven decisions. A lot of times, someone with many years of planning will come to you and say, I know that I need at least 4 weeks of inventory to service. But what you really should be asking is, okay, let's talk about why. So I want to look at the data. I want to look at the historical data. I want to see historically how much have they carried, what their service levels have been. But then I also want to challenge it a little bit and show them how we can get to that service level, using data-driven decisions and reducing that inventory as much as possible, but also reducing it at the right spots, looking for those opportunities in the network for reduction so that we can come to them and say, historically, you've needed 4 weeks, but your production capacity has increased Your storage has also increased. So you really shouldn't need to hold that much in order to service the same levels you were before. So here's what we believe your new target should be based on this historical data, and you take them through how you got to that conclusion. So in order to be able to have that conversation, you really should be building that strong foundation of making sure your system inputs and your system outputs are as accurate as possible. Because once you have that foundation, it makes those conversations a lot more easy to go back and look through the data and say, okay, this is where it came from, this is why we trust it, and this is how we got to the conclusion. So if you disagree with it, we're going to need to understand why you disagree with it. And just to reinforce that, you really need to validate through every step of this. And sometimes that means having a conversation with the planner or with the manager and saying, okay, does this make sense? Can you help me make sure this makes sense? And then through that, you're not only bringing them into the data, but you're also helping them understand the data so that ultimately someone who may not trust these numbers will begin to trust them and also be an advocate for you at the end of the day, because they'll be going to their team members and saying, look, I looked through all this stuff and it makes sense. I think you should be trusting it as well. So every single opportunity for improvement, anytime anyone pushes back, you should be saying, okay, let's work on this together so that we can validate, make sure it makes sense, and then also make sure that the output is correct so that you can trust this number at the end of the day. So it's that over communication, overall, and it's going to be a little bit of an adjustment period, I would say. It doesn't take, it takes a little bit longer for people to really buy into anything that's new or any concepts that they haven't seen before. And just kind of think about how long it really took you to understand all this data, to come to these conclusions and to really validate the output and try to transition that knowledge to them in a way that's most digestible. So allowing them that time to digest it, and as well as over communicating with them and bringing them into the process are change management techniques that you can really implement and validate and perform on a day-to-day basis. So a little bit about what we did with COVID-19. Overnight we saw that just incredible spike in demand, and there was a large response, mostly due to desimplification of our SKU portfolio, focusing on exactly what SKUs we knew needed to be produced because we knew the customers were going to be asking for them. We shut down transportation lanes to make sure that we were able to hold product only where it needed to be, and it wasn't being shipped out to somewhere where it was never going to be sent to the customer. We also started shipping directly from buffer warehouses instead of the forward network and the mixing centers and DCs. So we were reducing as much transportation as possible. We were producing just the SKUs that we knew needed to be produced. But what really set us up for success during this time was the fact that our min and max targets were set up in weeks of stock. So that means that they're a function of the forward-looking demand. So if your forward-looking demand increased from 2,000 cases to 200,000 cases, your weeks of stock are going to stay at 2 weeks of stock because the function dictates that you're going to need, those 2 weeks of stock of the 200,000 cases rather than the 2,000. So it's about making your targets dynamic with the incoming demand to ensure that no matter what the change is, your targets can handle that change. And at the end of the day, what this allowed us to do for this desimplified SKU list and for the simplified transportation network was to go into the production sites and say, okay, this is the minimum amount we need for this SKU to produce. So once they hit that number, they're able to switch to the next SKU as quickly as possible. So it's also allowing us to make sure that we have the correct amount of inventory being produced at the right time to make sure that the rest of the network flowed as smoothly as possible. So going into pre-COVID, it's important it was important to focus on these efficiencies and make sure that we did have the correct model set up and the dynamics in place so that when an age of disruption like this does occur, you're able to respond appropriately and there isn't going to be any noise around the exact data-driven decisions that you've already implemented. So through the COVID-19 crisis, we have seen a large impact to our service. I'm not going to lie, we have taken a hit. But what we've been able to do is maintain our service in the high 80s, low 90s, whereas a lot of other companies may be suffering in the mid 60s or 70s range. So for our company, we try to maintain a service level of 98.5. So when we see anything go below 95, that's red flags everywhere. And for us, trying to maintain that 90% service rate has been one of probably the most challenging aspects of this COVID environment. But I also want to reiterate that we're able to maintain such a high level during this time of disruption due to these strictly implemented targets and that change management and over communication and making sure that everyone's on board with these numbers. Okay, so I think we've got a little bit of time for questions. Isn't that right?
We do, David. Thanks for that. In listening to this, first, I had one really quick question. You talked about bringing Kraft and Heinz together. How many SKUs did you have to optimize? What was the scope of this?
Personally, my role is to optimize all the SKUs throughout the United States. There are some SKUs that are made in the U.S. and shipped to Canada. So what we're talking about really is about 12,000 individual base codes. I wouldn't say it's split 50-50 between Kraft and Heinz, but after the merger, we're looking at about 12,000 SKUs throughout the entire network.
In many respects, this is a big data project, and without data, we can't do these kinds of optimizations. Where did the initial data come from? So, for instance, you're bringing Kraft data into your Logility solution. What were you gathering from to do this project? Was it all historical, for instance?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So what we set up was for Logility to be able to look 52 weeks backward as well as 52 weeks forward. Okay. So it is very much impacted by the historical data. But you also need to be layering on top assumptions of what the future forecast will be. Because ignoring what the future forecast will be is going to just set up these opportunities for decreased accuracy in what your recommendations should be for inventory optimization. So it really is about looking to historicals as much as it is as looking to what the future forecast holds.
When you talk to people, since part of this conference is looking forward at technologies, and you may not be here yet, but I just wanted to throw this out. There's a lot of talk about AI and machine learning and planning inventory optimization. Those are areas that people are looking at as the low-hanging fruit to bring in either artificial intelligence or machine learning, and ultimately the areas where we may be able to automate and free up, planners to do more value-added things. Are you at that point where you're applying machine learning, from whatever plans you're running and then, going back to reevaluate, or is that on your roadmap?
I wouldn't say it's called true machine learning yet, but what we are doing is some very heavy statistical modeling. Okay. So what Logility does is it takes the multi-echelon approach and applies the data inputs that we provide it and takes that and implements it over a probability distribution to come to what the optimal setting should be at any node in the network. So it's not the true machine learning definition that we see today, but it's very close to what we believe the target computation should be. And looking at the true AI and getting to that stage in a roadmap, I see that as probably a 5-year goal rather than something we can do in the next 2 years.
Great, thank you. One last really quick question, and then that'll be all the time that we have. I know you're using Logility, and you had up there, part of the confidence building was both the IT and the S&OP. And Logility does, an S&OP module. Are you feeding what you're optimizing from multi-echelon inventory optimization then into S&OP, or do you use, if not Logility, another tool for S&OP? And is that, again, is what you're doing on your side then feeding in whatever you do with S&OP?
Absolutely. I just want to reiterate that it's this feedback loop, really. Okay. So SAP, feeds Logility, which I take the outputs of and make sure that they make sense before passing that to S&OP for them to be able to validate, digest it, and then give me their feedback of what might be wrong in the system, so that I can go back at each stage and look for opportunities to improvement in the calculations. I gave that kind of example of Pool Whip, where it just has the high heat. There's outliers, basically, is what I'm trying to say. Confounding variables that you may never be able to account for in your calculations, but that you should always be open to receiving. And that's where SNOP really brings its strength, is coming in with that knowledge and informing you as to how your data may be wrong.
Great. Thank you so much. That's all the time we have for this presentation. And again, David, thank you so much for sharing that with us.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
We're now ready for our last presentation of the day. For this one, we're going to end with another use case, in this case, robotics. Now, you may not think of robotics as an AI, big data, or machine learning kind of tool. We think of it as mechanical. But without those three elements, robots really don't work, and they don't learn, and they don't get better. In fact, the last 5 years has seen an explosion of robotics in warehousing and distribution operations, but it hasn't been one big bang. Rather, it's been slow and steady growth. The early adopters were primarily third-party logistics providers embracing autonomous mobile robots, or AMRs. Many of those early implementations were modest, with just a couple of robots in a facility. Piece-picking robots were an afterthought. That's starting to change. We now have examples of 3PLs using 20 or more AMRs in a facility and several hundred across our network. And we're seeing that technology find its way into facilities operated by retailers and e-tailers. You could argue that AMRs are mainstream. Now it's piece-picking robots' time to shine. I remember talking to the Gap 2 years ago after they installed 4 piece-picking robotic put walls in one facility. That number is now at least tenfold across the Gap's network and growing. Other retailers are taking note, and we're seeing other firms like MSC Industrial looking at processes beyond picking in their facilities. In the case of MSC, it's packing operations. Today, I'm joined by Darren Russell, MSC's Director of Logistics Engineering. Darren works out of MSC's Harrisburg, Pennsylvania facility, where MSC first implemented robots in packing. That's what we're going to talk about. So Darren, welcome.
Good afternoon, Bob. Thanks for having me.
Great. Why don't we get started? First, MSC has a unique customer service promise. Can you tell us a little about how your operations in Harrisburg, what do you do there? What kind of volumes are you dealing with? And how are your operations enabling your customer service promise?
Yeah, sure, Bob. So, first of all, MSC is a premier distributor of metalworking and MRO products and services. And as you mentioned, we have Harrisburg, Pennsylvania is one of our 5 customer fulfillment centers. Harrisburg is about 800,000 square feet with about 600,000+ items in the facility. And on a given day, we process about 8,000 to 10,000 orders. And to your point, we offer a guarantee same-day shipping to all of our customers. So as you can imagine, it's very, very critical that we minimize those cycle times through all the processes to ensure every single customer order gets out the door that same day. So the customer has it on their floor and can use it for whatever they need the next day.
Great, thank you. I had a chance to watch the video that Doug Jones made with Plus One Robotics, which provides the software for your robotics solution. One of the things he mentioned was the importance of innovation to MSC's competitive advantage. Before we talk about robotics and what you're doing with those, just talk a little bit about how you approach innovation at MSC. It's one of the themes of this conference.
Yeah, absolutely. So as you can imagine, MSC is looking to reduce costs out of our supply chain. That's pretty much common theme around the industry. And obviously innovation and technology like robotics, like we've done, is a big part of that future. It helps us reduce those costs. We're going to continue to look at other opportunities, look for other ways to leverage robotics or any type of technology to help MSC become leaner so we can compete at a high level. That's our ultimate goal. There's a lot of different technology out there, as you mentioned, AMRs with the robots that we're using currently on the market. And, when we do identify any innovation technology that we want to pursue, obviously, we're going to perform a robust ROI analysis on all projects to ensure, the cost benefit is there for MSC.
When just out of curiosity, when you're approaching a new technology like that, we heard from Kenco Logistics, a major 3PL provider earlier today. And they have an innovation center and an innovation team. Do you have an innovation center of excellence, and do you have a team dedicated to innovation?
Well, the team is really my engineering team.
Okay.
So, always evaluating, technology that's out in the field just through, the material handling shows or what other customers are doing, word of mouth, that type of stuff. Obviously, there's a lot of, marketing material that floats around. You get a lot of cold calls. So, my team is responsible for looking at those opportunities, evaluating those opportunities, and pursuing any opportunity that fits within our business too. So we don't have a technology team per se. Falls all within our supply chain engineering team.
So essentially, you're the guy.
Correct.
And one more question along those lines, because you talked about the things floating around on the shows. I just wondered, when you're, we're going to come to the robotics in a minute, but when you're thinking, let's say you go to ProMat, you go to ModeX or one of the other shows, and you see some of those new things, do you ever run, mini pilots, just understand what they do and how they might work in your operations, even if you're not going to roll them out right then and there?
Yeah, I think the key, Bob, is obviously understanding our business. My team's been here many, many years, so we can understand kind of what works and what doesn't work within our facility. There's some new things out there. There's some strange things. There's some innovative things out there. But I think the key for us has always been knowing our business, knowing how our business works, how something would fit. We'll engage with anyone if we think it's going to work. In the end, I think kind of to your point, it may not in the end, but we'll look at any technology that's out there to see if it's going to help us reduce our costs.
Great, thank you. MSC is no stranger to automation in your facilities. So what led you and your team to investigate piece-picking robots as a new tool? What was going on in your operations that you wanted to improve, and what did you think robotics could bring to the table?
Yeah, kind of like we've already talked about a little bit. Obviously, our first objective that Doug talked about too was, reducing our costs in supply chain. But obviously, one of the other things that you probably heard about is that the labor market has become tighter and tighter. Mm-hmm. It's getting more and more difficult out to find new associates to come into our operation and workforce. So, automation like robotics and other things that we've done and that we're looking at gives us the ability to still serve our customers in that tight labor market without worrying about, being short 10 people. If we can automate and, move associates or, hire the associates, put them in other aspects of the business, that's what we're trying to do too.
Great. On this project, what was your starting point? So for instance, how did you go about identifying an application and then vetting solution providers? What we see a lot is people are attacking picking, right? And you're putting the piece-picking robots in your packing operations. So tell us a little of that story about how that all evolved.
Yeah, it's actually very interesting, Bob. Yeah, just to kind of reiterate to your point, there is a lot of picking out there. That's what you mainly see in the market. But again, understanding our business and knowing what we're trying to tackle from reducing costs and what's going to work for us. Again, just looking at those non-value-added steps that we have in our operation, to process those orders, we looked at it and said, our biggest opportunity right now is packing. Mm-hmm. Not saying we don't have opportunity in picking, but we said, we can reduce some non-value-added steps, some touches out of the packing process. So that's kind of what we identified and went there. So, once we identified that area, we reached out to, several providers. We discussed their capabilities. We, kind of let them know our thoughts on the packing side, what we're trying to accomplish, let them tell us what they thought, what they think they can do, so forth and so on. But once we kind of vetted out those, providers, we decided to partner with Plus One, to support us and enhance our, customer fulfillment centers. So we not only did, vet out those providers, but it's important that we let those providers vet out us too. So again, as I've mentioned a couple times, not only MSC knowing our business, but it's important for those providers to try to understand our business too, because it's unique. Everybody's a little bit different out there. You know, their customers that they're working with now aren't MSC, and we're not their customers. So it works both ways on vetting each other out, understanding the capabilities of both.
I may be a little out of date on MSC's operations, and if I am, correct me. But in identifying packing, I remember doing a story on one of your facilities a couple of years ago, and based on how orders came in, like a maintenance person might open an order queue in the morning, but not hit the send button until 3 o'clock in the afternoon, right? Because they could just keep populating it. And then your promise to get things, shipped before that day is out meant that packing often became sort of a choke point or a really critical point in the operation, particularly at the end of the day. And so I was wondering if, when people are looking for places of value in their operations, packing being so critical to you, was that a reason for going after packing? And maybe that's changed since then, but I remember that as an issue.
No, you're exactly right, Bob. That is a big, big bottleneck for us.
Yeah.
As you mentioned, we have to prioritize incoming orders, so we're focusing on the orders that need to go out the soonest. There's no need to work on an order that doesn't need to go out till 11 at 10 a.m. So we really have to prioritize to make sure we're able to guarantee that same day shipping. So as you mentioned, we've done some work up in the packing area in the past, and that, again, from the value-added standpoint and reducing that cycle time for the orders to get out the door, again, led us to, okay, we can implement some robots up there. We don't have to worry about break times, lunchtime, call-offs. They're just going to work 24 hours a day for us and continue to move items from those totes to the box and get them out the door and help us reduce that bottleneck that we have.
Great. So once you settled on a solution provider, how did you pilot the technology, to prove out the concept?
Yeah, so that's a good one. So obviously it's a new technology for us. And as you mentioned, it's a new technology really for distribution too, and specifically in what we're doing. So, working closely with Plus One, we created a detailed plan. We did a lot of different test pilots. I think we actually ended up doing 4 different pilots just to get it to work, to collect, analyze data, to configure the software that's going to work for us, not anybody else, of course. And then once we collected all that data, actually Plus One created a demo in their shop too, and created a real life scenario in their facility so they can continue to test, analyze data, update the system, so forth and so on. Then obviously, once we got to the point to where the performance of those pilots, performance of their test model in their facility were satisfactory, then we moved to the full implementation actually on site. And then obviously, as you can imagine, once you implement on site, you still have some hurdles to overcome and some additional data to collect and improve from there too.
How long was the pilot, how long did it take to do the pilot to prove out the concept?
Well, for all 4 pilots, we probably took around a year to do all 4 together. But the very first pilot, it was maybe a couple months. And to your point, that very first pilot was, is this going to work? Mm-hmm. Is Plus One going to be able to do it? Is MSC be able to do it? And once we got through that first 2 months and saying, hey, the concept will work, we know there's a lot of additional work to make a final solution. But after that 2 months, we said, yes, we're good to go. Now let's go full speed ahead and get the final solution and implementation.
Great. And maybe for attendees who aren't familiar with the companies, it might be good to point out, even though robotics is in Plus One's name, they don't provide the hardware. They're the vision system and the intelligence, basically, that runs a robotic system. Which reminded me, we recorded the other day a presentation that'll be on tomorrow with Adrian Kumar from DHL. And it was a robotics presentation. He spent most of it talking about software. And when I asked him about that, he said, well, when we first started using robots about 5 years ago, we really focused on the hardware. But what we discovered as time went on, it really wasn't about the hardware, it's about the software. That's where the that's where the action is. And essentially, that's what you've done with Plus One. I don't want to minimize the role of the robotic arm, but it's a piece of hardware. Without the software and the intelligence behind the software, it doesn't really do anything.
You're exactly right. From the very get-go, we always said, based upon our learnings from Plus One and just the industry, that the robot arm, in all fairness, it's a commodity. There's tons of them out there, and they all work very, very well. But it's the brains behind it. That arm is not going to do anything without that software behind it, and the vision system that goes with that software to identify where those items are in our totes to be able to go to pick it up. So without the brains behind it, it's just going to sit there.
This might be a good point also. Let's tell the attendees what the robots actually do. In your operation, what's their role and what's the process they're handling?
Yeah, absolutely. So as we kind of already talked about, we have the robotic arms in our packing operation. So we are a pick-pack operation. We pick items into totes. Those totes route to pack stations to where an associate, or in this case, a robotic arm, will pick and place those items out of the tote into the shipping container to go directly to shipping and out the door. So that is pretty much as simple as that. Obviously, there's a lot of brains and software behind it, but that's what we're doing. And
then is it a limited line of SKUs?
We do have a limitation. We do exclude items that need special packaging to ensure those items get to customers safely, like light bulbs. We do some special packaging of light bulbs. If we didn't do that, we increase the likelihood that light bulb may bust to get to the customer.
Right.
So.
Great. I'm going to bring you back to the project now. So you've piloted that, you've tested out the concept. Now you're going to go live. So what did it take to go live? Did you have to make physical changes? And was there change management with your workforce, bringing in this new kind of automation?
Yeah, so from a change standpoint, physical standpoint, we are fully integrated with our existing system physically and systematically. So from a physical standpoint, all we really had to do is we created a robotic pack station specially designed for our operation. That pretty much, in all honesty, just replaces the existing manual pack station. So take one out, put the other in. Everything still flows through our system as it did before. We're still picking in the totes. The totes still route accordingly, same exact way. So from a physical standpoint, it wasn't a huge endeavor for us. And the reason we went that way is just to minimize the disruption to the operation, minimize changes as much as we can to the physical standpoint and the processes also. From a change management standpoint, obviously implementing new technology or anything new within a facility start to get a little angst within the facility and associates. So, before we started implementing anything in Harrisburg, we created a communication plan internally, and that was designed to support our associates through the change, through understanding the robots, how they're going to work, how they're going to be implemented, the benefits to MSC, and ultimately how they are going to be impacted. So that's very key. As we went through the process, we continually communicated the status. We continually talked to them, answered questions on, how they are going to be impacted, what's going to do for MSC, so forth and so on.
Well, you have a lot of automation, so I'm guessing that your associates, they're accustomed to seeing automation in there. One of the things I wondered when I've talked with some companies, particularly that have put in the AMRs, right, that once the associates start working with them, they actually kind of take pride in the fact that they're working in a facility with robots, that it's kind of a cool thing to do, for lack of a better term. So have your employees embraced this? Like, to them, is this one more, interesting tool that is in their workplace?
Yeah, you're exactly right. And I think you know us well by now. We have implemented a lot of technology. And, from a Harrisburg, Pennsylvania standpoint, they're the lucky ones that always get it first. That's good or bad, but they are used to it. even though they're used to it, that doesn't change the fact that from a change management standpoint, as you can imagine, it's still important to make sure that communication plan is correct, that we are communicating to them. Yes, robots is kind of the quote unquote cool thing now.
Right.
And it's neat to see out there. So it may have made it a little bit different. And, we haven't had any issues, but it's still important that that communication plan is really evolved and, the message is sent out to our associates.
Were they part of the implementation process? Sometimes, since the robots work without people, maybe not, but sometimes when you're bringing in new automation, you'll have, the team work with the automation so that they kind of introduce it to the rest of the team members.
Yeah, going back to the very first test pilot that we had to do, part of that data collection, we had to go out into the floor and we had to work with an associate. So at that point, to collect that data, we had to involve an associate. We had to start that communication, explain what we're doing, how we're doing it, why we're doing it, how is it going to impact that associate, so forth and so on. So that's kind of our involvement. And then obviously there's other aspects of the business from a maintenance perspective, as you can imagine. They're involved from the very get-go, from a PM standpoint, what's going to take to maintain it, so forth and so on.
We talked about software a little bit ago, and one of the things that's, this block is on AI and machine learning and big data. And in that video that Plus One made with Doug Jones, the supply chain leader at MSC, he talked about how the machine learns and about the pilot, who is an individual that oversees, all of those robots. Explain how that works and how the robot learns, the machine learning aspect of it.
Right. Yeah. So that's very, very key for us. So, as we talked about, the software is the key behind the robot, but, that software is going to get hung up once in a while because it can't pick something that we offer. So what it does is if the robot can't automatically pick up an item, it'll generate a request to what's called a crew chief, which is an associate at Plus One who sits in San Antonio to intervene. So that person in San Antonio is watching all of our robots in Harrisburg and in the future for other robots. And that person will instruct or direct or control how that robot needs to go pick up that item. So every time a robot successfully picks up an item, either automatically or intervention from the crew chief, it's learning how to do it. Mm-hmm. So it's gathering that data every single pick. So the more that we can do, the more that it learns and the better it gets over time. So that crew chief in San Antonio is a key component for us because based upon our variety of items, there's going to be a good chance that somewhere along the line it's not going to be able to pick up something on the first try.
So now that you're using them, what have you learned about their capabilities and then also about their limitations? What do you know now that you didn't know before?
Well, as you can imagine, and robots have been around for a while. They've been around in manufacturing. So, robots like in an automotive world, it's pretty consistent. Mm-hmm. In a distribution environment, in our environment, it's not consistent. Right. We have a lot of different items, as I mentioned, 600 plus thousand. A lot of different characteristics like size, weight, how that item is packaged. You wouldn't even imagine that, just depending on how that item is packaged, if that robot's going to be able to get it. So the variability of a business can have an impact on how that robot's going to perform. So obviously with the huge variability in our business, we do have times where it can't pick up an item. But then going back to that crew chief function, that partnership of human intervention with automation is still going to have to exist. To keep everything running, to reduce that downtime of that robot sitting there because it can't pick up an item. So I think that's what we've kind of learned about the capabilities. You can't expect 100%, but the advantage we have is that crew chief being able to instruct it and that robot arm learning from that point going forward.
Just a couple more questions. How many are you using in Harrisburg, and how many items do they pick a day? And then second part of that, are you going to expand the use either within Harrisburg or to your other facilities, or have you already done it?
Yep. Yeah, so we currently have 3 robotic arm pack stations in Harrisburg. From a total volume standpoint, they're producing on an average about 2,500 a day, orders per day, with, it's glad to say yesterday being our peak day, we did about 3,000 orders. So we're humming along. We're increasing volume every single day. Now based upon this full implementation and the numbers that we're seeing, yes, we have decided to, start expanding this technology, meaning the robotic arms, to other facilities. And we're actively working on that now for one of our other 5 CFCs.
Great. Last question. Having done this, knowing now what I didn't know before, what's the one piece of advice that you'd give to another company that's going to consider piece-picking robots?
I think the interesting thing about robots is you kind of have to have a little bit of an imagination. You kind of talked about it earlier. You see everything out there right now, not everything. A lot of it is on the picking side. There's a lot of different options out there. Well, we kind of bucked the norm a little bit and went on the packing side. And we're evaluating other things. Use your imagination on what you can do with a robot. Engage in a good partner. Obviously, let that partner know your business, their business, that type of stuff. But you got to use your imagination and just really, really scrutinize where the value is in your operation and what you want to take out. And it may not be the whole packing part. It may be part of the packing part. But I think that's what I've learned. There's opportunities out there if you just use your imagination and come up with a solution.
Great. Darren, thank you. Thanks for your time, and thanks for sharing MSC's story with us. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Bob. You have a great day. Appreciate your time.
Thank you. That's the end of the block. I want to thank all of the sponsors and all of the presenters and moderators who made this a successful opening day. And I look forward to all of you joining us tomorrow. Brian.
Yes, it was a fantastic day, and a lot more tomorrow and Thursday. Again, we'd like to thank all the sponsors of the NextGen Supply Chain Conference. Our exhibit hall is still open and will be open until 2:30. And please don't forget to play the leaderboard game, where you can win thousands of dollars in prizes simply for your participation in the conference. We'll see you all tomorrow.
The time is right now, no standing still. Only one choice now.